my name is Elizabeth Coverdell, and today I'm going to be giving a presentation on a psychological disorder called post-traumatic stress disorder, otherwise known as PTSD. And PTSD can be defined as a disorder characterized by haunting memories, nightmares, hypervigilance, avoidance of trauma-related stimuli, social withdrawal like jumpy anxiety, numbness of feeling, insomnia that lingers for 4 weeks or more after traumatic experience, all those kind of things. Who does PTSD affect? It's usually survivors of accidents, disasters, war-related refugees, and violent and sexual assaults. Usually these kind of people will experience the symptoms. And like I touched on before, beginning when I was explaining what PTSD was, the symptoms include reoccurring haunting memories and nightmares, like I said, laser-focused attention to and avoidance of the possible threats that may have caused the PTSD in the first place, social withdrawal, and like I said before, jumpy anxiety. To go more in depth, I'm going to talk about some of the influences and factors that can affect PTSD. For example, if you think of the greater one's emotional distress during a trauma, the higher the risk for the post-traumatic symptoms. There are some people who actually don't react this way, and it's called survivor resiliency, which basically after a traumatic event, they're able to recover from the severe stress that they were under. But usually the higher the distress, for example, like if you think of physical torture that prisoners of war experienced, like when they were captured, then the higher the risk. Another factor may include that some people have more sensitive emotion processing, like a more sensitive emotion processing limbic system that floods their bodies with stress hormones. Another thing about PTSD that I didn't know before making this presentation was that the odds of experiencing PTSD after a traumatic event are higher for women than they are for men. So for like the results, or towards the end of my reading, I found that there are some critics and psychologists that believe that PTSD has been overdiagnosed, and people are kind of like expanding what would qualify to be PTSD into, they're like stretched to include normal stress-related memories and dreams instead of having like the more traumatic ones be kind of where they draw the line. And there are also some questionable procedures that ask people to kind of revisit the experience that they had that is causing them all this like emotional and like mental trauma. And they ask them to vent their emotions, but it has been proven that it may worsen the normal stress reactions as a result. Overall for this chapter, I've had a very personal experience with PTSD. I was in a pretty bad car accident a couple months back, and about 2 weeks after the accident, I think it was, there was a deer that it was snowing outside, and so it was hard to see, and it was at night, and a deer ran out in front of my car, and basically my whole mentally and physically my body kind of shut down, and I was unable to drive. I had to stop the car and calm myself down, because it flashed me back to being in the car when I got into the accident, and it really took its toll on me mentally and emotionally. I had a very hard time dealing with it. I would try avoiding driving as much as possible, ride with other people so that I wasn't the one who had to drive. And even when other people, when I'm driving with them, if they get closer to another car or swerve a little bit, it gives me anxiety and gives me a little reminder of kind of what happened in my accident. And then for my graphic, it shows the veterans with service-related PTSD, because that's usually when people hear about post-traumatic stress disorder, they think about war veterans and people coming back from war and having those nightmares and things that they have to deal with and go to therapy for. And so that's why I looked at this graph, and it uses the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, and the Iraq and Afghanistan War. And from the graphic, it shows that the most were from Vietnam, the most people who came back with PTSD or had it when they came back, were from Vietnam. And if you think back to the history classes that you've taken, you think of Vietnam and you think of that jungle warfare and all the trauma that was involved with being in that war. It was a very tough one for people to come back to and recover from. And so that's my presentation on PTSD.